Did we ever get snow? How are we going to do class? These questions and more. Hey everybody, first off, I hope you had a very wonderful little Groundhog's Day. As I'm recording this thing, we know that Puxatawny Phil at least saw his shadow. I don't know about any of the others. Unfortunately, there was one of the famous groundhogs from New Jersey who actually passed away 2 days ago, so no one in New Jersey is going to know what kind of weather we have. So, we get buried in a blizzard, just think it could be worse. You could be in New Jersey with no idea what's going on. Anyway, I wanted to go ahead and cover some of the things that we're going to be doing in our online class. First off, if you go to the 2-3 folder in Blackboard, you'll see that I've added 2 videos. One of them is a TED Talk with Philip Zimbardo, who is the psychologist who did the Stanford prison experiment. I've mentioned that we're going to discuss it, and I figured that there was no better way to start off than with going for the man who ran the thing himself. And we'll be talking more about him as we go along as well. Secondly, we have a video that actually comes from my tech writing classes, but it's one that we're going to cover the subject anyway. It's called chunking. It's about how we properly organize information. So I want to make sure that you watch both of those. Now, the work that you had due by the start of class today was the Sample Student Essay Monkey Business, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the Writing Skills Builder Analogies. I'm going to leave off talking about the Writing Skills Builder Analogies, the actual assignment, until we meet again. That way I can ask you if there's any of the specific analogies that you had questions on. But it's a good thing for us to start talking about. Analogies are when you are able to relate one thing that somebody does know to something else that they may not know. It's a way to draw connections between things. And if your audience doesn't know your subject, this can be a very positive for you. If you can relate it to something they do know, they're going to be able to really know what you're talking about. The thing with analogies, it's all about figuring out the relationships between the words and trying to make sure that your answer fits that same relationship. So while I will go over the ones we did in class when we meet again, I just wanted to hit you with a few other analogies. First off, palette is to painter as trial is to jury, barber is to scissors, sandwich is to restaurant, saddle is to jockey. Now, the relationship between palette and painter, a painter is someone who uses a palette. It's a tool that they use. So we need to have something that follows that same pattern. A jury does not use a trial as a tool, and scissors don't use a barber as a tool. So the order here is important. A restaurant might sell a sandwich, but a sandwich isn't the tool they use. So we've got jockey is to saddle. Well, they got to ride on the horse on something, don't they? So, the answer is D for this one. So it can be a person and the tool they use as the main relationship. Listless is to energy as devout is to prayer, frigid is to warmth, potent is to power, or distant is to location. So listless is an emotional state without list, when you don't have much energy. So we're talking about opposites here. Devout is to prayer? Well, maybe, but not really. Potent is to power? We're not really talking about feelings. And if you're potent, you have power. If you're distant, location isn't the same thing. So we're talking listless is a lack of energy and frigid is a lack of warmth. That's the relationship. Iconoclast is to convention, as pariah is to friendship, anarchist is to government, sycophant is to love, or tailor is to robe. An iconoclast is somebody who defies conventions, someone who has forged their own path. So that's the relationship we have here. Iconoclast defies conventions, and anarchist defies government. So there's where we go. A sycophant doesn't defy love. A sycophant thinks that they love other people, but they're basically trying to make everyone else think that they love them. Tailor and robe? No, tailors might make robes, but they're not defying. A pariah? Friendship? I don't know about you, but I've had friends in the past who I didn't really like all that much. So it's not really the one iconoclast who defies convention. The relationship doesn't line up. Maven is to expertise, as supplicant is to humility. Klutz is to grace. Neophyte is to honesty, or monarch is to wisdom. Now, if you don't understand a word, of course the first thing you should do is go back and look up that word. And understanding the concepts here is very important, so you want to make sure that you're fully aware of the two terms. Maven and expertise, what's the relationship between them? A maven is somebody who has a whole lot of expertise. A neophyte has a whole lot of honesty, maybe. But neophyte means new, so not necessarily. A monarch has a whole lot of wisdom. We would hope that they would, but that's not necessarily the case. Klutz and graces are opposite. So, being a maven requires expertise, and being a supplicant, supplicating yourself to a higher power, requires that you have some level of humility. Opposites again. Sodden is to moist. I don't have the fear of the word moist that a lot of people tend to. I don't understand why people are so afraid of the word moist. How else would you describe chocolate cake? Anyway, sodden is too moist, as arid is too harsh, nostalgic is too emotional, maudlin is too sentimental, wet is too liquid. If something is sodden, it's very, very, very wet. Moist is a milder degree. So we have heavy degree, mild degree, arid, harsh. Well, you can be harsh without being arid. So, not really the case. Wet is too liquid. Not really. Liquid isn't really a level of quantity. Nostalgic is too emotional. Maudlin is too sentimental are the two remaining ones. Maudlin is to sentimental is a lot better fit because someone who's maudlin is very, very sentimental. Sodden is a greater degree of moist, so maudlin is a greater degree of sentimentality. When you're dealing with the relationship between words in an analogy, they can be antonyms, opposites. They can be synonyms, the same. They can be a thing in context or the context in the thing, a tool with its worker or a worker with its tool. Part to whole, whole to part, object, action, action to object. It doesn't matter. There are a ton of different possibilities in terms of relations. You just need to be able to make sure that the relationship you're describing on one side is the same as the other side. Now, when you're doing writing, getting analogies and understanding the thought process can be really vital because, as I said, if you can draw a connection between something that people know a lot about and something that nobody knows about, you can really get ahead. I wrote a paper on the TV show House MD ages ago, and one of the things that I had problems with was even though it was the highest rated TV show in the world at the time, nobody had written any scholarship about it. So I didn't have a lot of research to incorporate. So I had to find something to relate it to. So I ended up relating it to trends that were going on in comic book fiction at the time because a lot of the same things were happening. And that allowed me to say, if you understand these things that are going on in comic book fiction, you can understand my point about what's going on in the TV show House. Analogies aren't just these fun little quizzy things we do. They can really help us communicate information. Now, let's talk about the sample student paper. One of the things that I'm going to come back to is I use actual papers from actual students who've taken my class. And I really want to have a better selection of sample student papers. At the end of the semester, I'll be asking for permission to use your papers for future students. If I get permission, I will make everything completely and utterly anonymous. Nobody will ever be able to trace it back to you. Probably I won't be able to. And I will only use it for future education purposes. But if I had really great sample student papers, it would make everything a whole lot easier for the future students. So let's talk about the specific paper that we're doing this time, Monkey Business. In case you're curious, the fake names I gave this batch of sample student papers We're all different people who've played Captain Marvel. I think I just watched the movie when I put this together or something. I don't know. Anyway, one of the things that I've said in class a few times is if you want to know if your argumentative structure works out really well, read the thesis statement and just the topic sentences. And does it make sense in that case? If it does, you probably have a good framework to an argument. People do outlines at any number of stages, and mostly we think about outlines as something you do before you start a drafting procedure. But I'm here to tell you that outlines can save you at a whole lot of different circumstances. When things start to go wrong, do an outline. If you're trying to understand a complex argument, do an outline. Outlines can be your big friends because they make you focus on just the argument and ignoring everything else. And if you can get just that argument right, then it's a matter of connecting the dots. So that's what we're going to do for this paper, Monkey Business. What is the thesis statement? Copied word for word. Harlow's experiments are still controversial to some in the field, but we have learned so much from his work that it's hard to reasonably condemn him. Now, let's break this down. First thing I see is that there's a little bit of a lack of specificity. Still controversial to some. Okay. How are they controversial? To whom is it controversial? Why is it controversial? The thesis doesn't set us up for that. But we have learned, why the first person plural in here? When people mess with narrative voice, you really should have a good reason. Third person narrative voice is generally what we expect in academic writing. If you go to something else, there needs to be a good reason. Because if someone writes I'm thinking about the author of the paper, not what they're writing. If they write you, they're talking to me directly, and I'm thinking about my own experiences. If they go for the first person plural we here, I'm trying to see, do I line up with what this author thinks? They haven't really proven that yet. At any rate, if I'm thinking any of those things, what am I not thinking about? That's right, I'm not thinking about the argument. We have learned so much from his work, such as, doesn't tell us, that it's hard to reasonably condemn him. I'm not asking how difficult it is, I'm asking you to render judgment. And ultimately, if I go to the letter of what's said here, this person isn't giving me any specifics and is only telling me that the process in condemning him can be difficult. It doesn't tell us what this person actually thinks. Read literally, that is. If I read this a little bit more sympathetically, I can hear them say that I can reinterpret this as saying, what we have learned from Harlow's experiments, which is blah, blah, and blah, justifies all the bad crap that happened. But I'm having to read that into it, and that is a problem. So let's see how well this paper works as we go through it. They don't have the traditional thesis statement, the subject of analysis. They do tell us the subject. They don't give us the precise claims, and they definitely don't spell out the blueprint of reason. So we're going to have to spend a certain amount of our attention as we go through this paper trying to figure out what that argument is as we go. So, second paragraph starts off with, Harlow's work in this field, if there is ever a time to use pronouns, that time is not in thesis statement or topic sentences. As I said, you have to be able to read these things on their own and have the paper make sense. I have to, if I see this sentence, I have to guess at what this field means. I'd have to look at before. Thesis statements and topic sentences need to stand on their own. It was just one of many projects that revolved around behaviorism, studying the way the psyche reacts to abnormal stimulations or being trained to respond to certain stimuli. What they're trying to do in this paragraph is situate Harlow's work within a specific field, and that of not only just psychology, but psychology that focuses on behavioralism. Why don't they just say Harlow's work is best understood in the context of behavioralism? There's a lot of wordiness here, isn't there? Wordiness generally isn't a good thing, but particularly not when you're talking about the explicit argument. Third paragraph. The effects of the study were expectedly depressing. Infants who were left alone experience extreme disturbance, sometimes incurable. Now, this is the first time one of the topic sentences has given us anything specific. We know it's about infants who are left alone. A study that tells us that infants who are left alone experience extreme disturbance. I'm going to be like, well, duh, did we not figure that out? If it was expectedly depressing, then that says something that needs to be analyzed. If they didn't know these were the results, like Milgram's experiment where he claimed they didn't know this was going to happen, then that's one thing. If you knew that this was going to happen, if anyone would predict, and I think if you leave the children alone and don't interact with them, they're going to turn out bad. Gee, duh. If it's expected, then you're not really telling me anything I couldn't figure out on my own. Do these results make the experiment a bad one? I don't know. Why are you asking me? This is a real point here because topic sentences are supposed to situate the paragraph within the larger argument. This one is eschewing the burden of proof and saying, oh, you figure it out. Yeah, they're probably answering it right away, but this isn't how you should be working. Your job is to spell out how your argument works. Rhetorical questions in general and academic writing aren't a great thing. If you're going to use them in the introduction. Don't use them later in the paper, and certainly don't use them in something which is supposed to be stating your argument. To grasp the gravity of the experiment, we have to ask ourselves if this potential for knowledge is worth it. Are we willing to break the heart in order to study it? Again, rhetorical question. If I'm looking at just the explicit parts of the argument, I still don't know what their answer is. Conclusion. So I will say that this experiment was worth the trouble, if not for directly influencing our ability to understand these ailments so that we can devise treatments and therapy for them if we somehow haven't already, then for nothing else but to be a common sense reminder that humans are social creatures. I'm questioning the paper's logic at this point. I know that from their explicit parts of the argument, I'm not really sure if we need a common sense reminder that if someone is socially isolated, they're going to turn out bad. So I have an argumentative problem with this, but in terms of how this paper was structured, did we get enough information on the structure from the thesis statement and topic sentences to really get here? I don't really think we did, and that is a big problem. So that's our run through on this. My answer is I don't see how the proof operates in here. I think when they're going for we need a big picture reminder that we're social animals, this isn't something you can just say and let it go. You're establishing when you don't get more specific on a thesis statement, you're establishing a huge burden of proof. And from what I saw on the topic sentences, I don't think that this paper was vast enough in its scale to accomplish the burden of proof that it established by stating the thesis that way. I mean, we have learned so much, such as it's hard to reasonably condemn him. We get into this whole question that I mentioned last time when we were talking about Milgram is, are you more interested in the people or the advancement of knowledge? And how do you balance them? And the answer I'm getting out of this paper is that this experiment showed that, yeah, we should know this stuff, even though it's common sense. No. If you have questions about this, let's talk about them when we meet again on Monday. Next time when we meet on Monday, we have from Torture at Yale, which is somebody who actually experimented in the original Milgram experiment. We're going to talk about Philip Zimbardo that we didn't get to talk about today because we're doing this all remotely. One final thing is that I have voting for the Best of Writing Skills Builders narrative in today's folder. If you haven't seen them yet, go ahead and read them and vote on your favorite. I will give you bonus points for simply voting. So that's everything about our online class. Stay safe, try to stay warm, and enjoy your snow break. Bye, everybody.